Boa tarde a todos. Minha vez de dizer bem-vindos à Semana de Inovação 2020, ao nosso entre-lugar, onde nós vamos juntos reimaginar e construir futuros. E esses futuros, sem dúvida, passam por repensar a relação do governo com a sociedade, do Estado com o cidadão. E para conversar conosco hoje, nós trazemos uma das grandes mentes no mundo pensando o assunto. Ela é a Beth Novak. Eu vou mudar para o inglês agora, mas eu convido quem quiser para acessar na nossa plataforma a tradução simultânea do evento, também a tradução em Libras, e, além disso, acessar o QR Code para enviar perguntas. Well, now it's time to say welcome to Beth Novak, directly from New York into the in-between place. I'm glad to welcome her and say that now it's time for us to discuss how to build a more citizen-centered government and also how global leaders and the public sector can tap into the collective intelligence to build solutions for public problems. Beth, it's a great pleasure to have you here and for you to inspire us to build possible futures. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you, but we are fixing it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Beth.
Fantastic. Are you, and let me see if you can also see some slides, and we'll put those up as well.
Yes, we can see them.
Great. Ready for me to dive in?
Yes. The floor is all yours.
And let me thank the translators as the very first thing that I do. I appreciate their efforts to perhaps not only translate, but I hope improve what I say. So I appreciate their help. Let's dive in right away here. Let me just make sure we got the slides working. There we go. Super. So many of you have probably not heard the name of Genrikh Altshuler. He was the Soviet Union's father of what he called problem science. Altshuler was a scientist, an engineer, and a journalist, and he coined the term that he gave to this book called a theory of inventive problem solving, or what was known as TRIZ. TRIZ was a series of 40 problem-solving strategies that he claimed could be applied in any context. So the strategies he developed were derived from studying patented inventions and analyzing learners' written solutions to problems. And he codified this manual for the study of problem solving. And in so doing, what he was trying to do was to dispel, to get rid of the belief that problem solving is somehow something we're born with and that it cannot be taught. The TRIZ practitioner simply goes down this list of problem solving heuristics until she finds the right one to apply to the problem. By the 1980s, TRIZ had become a movement, not only in the Soviet Union, but also globally, with clubs emerging, TRIZ clubs all over the world, to encourage the teaching and learning of methods for solving problems. Unfortunately, none of this helped Altshuler with his own problem. In 1950, Joseph Stalin sent him to the Gulag for criticizing the nation's failure to adequately teach problem solving, and he was not released until after Stalin's death. Now, one example of the TRIZ problem-solving methods is the trick of what Altshuler called doing it inversely. Altshuler illustrates this concept with the example of filling, there's our gulag, sorry, let me go backwards there. He illustrates this concept with the example of filling chocolate candies with liquid syrup. Now, the obvious but unworkable solution of how you actually do this is to pour the cherry candy inside the bonbon, and you heat the liquid and you fill the chocolates. But of course, if you do this, that melts the candy. The counterintuitive but correct approach is to do it inversely, namely to freeze the liquid and then encase it in hot chocolate. So I bring up Altshuler's anecdote or this example because I want to start with the question of whether there's a universal problem-solving manual that we can use for complex economic, political, or societal problems. And the answer, I think, is really not really. With the mechanical problems that Altshuler sought to solve, the problem is known, the desired solution is clear, and only the method is something that needs to be selected from a menu of tricks and tools. Many problems can be easily solved in this way because the solution is obvious. So when something breaks, we replace the part. But with public problems, or what some people call wicked problems, or social problems or policy problems, the problem, the solution, and frankly, the method itself may all be unknown, and even the goal is contested. So it's no wonder that the word problem derives from the Greek word problema, which means obstacle. These obstacles are what I want us to focus on in our conversation today as we talk about the skills of the public problem solver. Now, it's not hard to conceive of a public problem today. We're living in very tumultuous times. We're seeing dramatic rises still of COVID cases. Here in the United States, every single state has seen an increase in COVID cases this week. We have over 1.25 million people dead, and a tremendous number of those, too many, are in Brazil and in the United States. We, of course, also have the problem of systemic racism and demonstrations that have been erupting all over the world, sparked by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back in May. It's just the latest, though, in a long list of police killings that expose the depth of racial injustice in America. And of course, systemic and unconfronted racism plagues Brazil as well, where Blacks are dramatically overrepresented in unemployment and dramatically underrepresented in government. We also have the lasting challenge in both countries of wealth inequality, which continues to increase. Across the OECD, for example, the average income of the richest 10% of the population is about 9 times that of the poorest 10%. And Jeff Bezos, as you probably heard, is anticipated to become the planet's first trillionaire by 2026. Across the globe, the richest 1% of people control 82% of the total wealth. And just 42 people, that's not 42% or 4,200, that's 42 people, own the same amount of wealth as the poorest 50% of the global population, according to Oxfam. Adding insult to injury, points out Harvard philosopher Michael Sandel in his brand new book, The Tyranny of Merit, is that this decreasing quality of life is coupled with what he describes as the rhetoric of rising. In other words, the message that if everyone has an equal chance to succeed, then the failure to succeed is one's own fault. Inequality of outcomes is excused by supposed equality of opportunity, an equality that simply doesn't exist. Thus, as inequality widens, Sandel argues, the so-called pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude, coupled with a market-oriented and technocratic approach to governing that excludes ordinary people from decision-making, fuels populist discontent, societal frustration, anger, and disappointment at this tyranny of merit. And of course, we add to all the acute challenges we're facing the persistent and existential threat of climate change that underlies all of our challenges, causing most people to feel today that government response is ineffectual at best. And of course, as we know, the trust in government in both the United States and Brazil, at least before the pandemic, and in many places, including here after the pandemic and during the pandemic, is really at an all-time low. This is not unique to either of our countries. This is the case, of course, all over the world, that we're seeing these terrifically low rates of trust in government, and perhaps more shockingly, also in democracy. Now, the origin of this loss of faith in our governments and our institutions, it's not new to the current political administrations in either country. Ronald Reagan famously said in his first inaugural address, "Government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem." And Thatcher in the UK around the same time said that the market is a more powerful and more reliable liberating force than government can ever be. But I believe they were wrong. And this rhetoric of smaller government is wrong. Frankly, sometimes government can, and as we've seen too often today, can indeed be the problem. But I'm also certain that, as we've also seen during the pandemic, that government can and often is, and frankly must be, the solution. And in fact, without good governments, effective government, innovative government, it's really hard to see how our greatest problems can be solved at all. Margaret Mead famously said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And many of those thoughtful and committed citizens, I would argue, whose work inside government. They're what Nobel Prize winning economist Elinor Ostrom called public entrepreneurs. in her 1964 dissertation. They're public problem solvers who want to live lives of purpose, and in an era of unprecedented interconnectedness and access to information driven by digital technology, I would argue the time of the public entrepreneur has truly come. Having previously worked in government at the national level, now I have the privilege to lead a team of engineers and designers and policy professionals in the Office of Innovation in the state of New Jersey. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March 2020, we were able to use data and technology and unprecedented levels of collaboration to show how government can be nimble and effective, not a lumbering and unresponsive bureaucracy. We worked with the Federation of American Scientists to build a website and an Alexa skill to enable the public to pose questions about the virus to over 600 scientists and receive rapid, well-researched responses. We collaborated with a private sector company that lent us the tech and the talent to create this website, covid19.nj.gov, in just 3 days. The site has received over 16 million users in a state of less than 9 million people. When we couldn't determine the number of deaths on the basis of race, because the testing labs were not providing that information, the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health shared key data with one another that enabled us to answer this question. That typically, I would say in the past, we never would have gotten that done, and maybe it would have taken us a year to work out that data sharing arrangement. Instead, we did this with 2 emails in 1 day. In 3 days, we produced the nation's first job site to list available positions in essential businesses and to help fix the application process for food benefits and unemployment benefits. Now, where we're proud of this work in New Jersey, it was really insignificant compared with all that we still have to do, and frankly, more importantly, compared to the outpouring of community and volunteer efforts in response to the pandemic. There was a group called Invisible Hands, one of really countless such mutual aid organizations, who coordinated tens of thousands of volunteers to deliver groceries to the elderly. And we've heard these stories from all around the world. The unique conditions created by the pandemic made organizations that were typically quite backwards willing to bust through normal barriers and get things done and get them done quickly. But let me just add that public problem solvers are not only born in a crisis, not only born in extremis. In my work as director of the Governance Lab, a nonprofit research, what we call a do tank rather than a think tank, based at New York University, I get to see such problem solving in governments all around the world. In Helsinki, the mayor's office created this climate watch process and website to enable citizens and city leaders to co-create their community's climate change plan. Citizens are able to use the website to hold public officials accountable and track them on the performance and implementation of 147 target goals. The cities of Antwerp and Barcelona in Spain, are distributing strawberry plants to residents and asking them to use the plants as a way to gather data about air quality by testing the leaves over time. Public sector entrepreneurs are also working in a city called Lakewood, Colorado. This is a community of 150,000 people, where the city's single urban planner, one person, uses technology and to coordinate 20,000 citizen volunteers during 500 different sustainability projects. And they're replicating this across a series of cities. Now, all these people who do these innovative projects share key skills in common. They are innovative problem solvers who know how to take a project from idea to implementation rapidly. They're not trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's tools. Rather, they're using an expanded toolkit for change. Very specifically, they know how to tackle hard problems with rather than for communities. They know how to define problems that are urgent and matter to real people. They know how to use data to understand the breadth and nature of a problem. They talk to and engage with individuals and communities to understand the problem as people experience it. And they know too how to scan sources rapidly for reliable evidence of what else has worked, what we might call rapid field scanning or evidence synthesis. They know how to build teams and partnerships that cross disciplines and sectors to launch a project in practice, crossing the chasm again from idea to implementation. And as I said before, these skills are not intuitive. For every person I meet who has made effective change, I meet 10 who have the desire, but don't have the capacity, frankly, to make a difference. And it's vital, I think, to have an overview and understanding of what these skills of public entrepreneurship really look like. So just as the job seeker needs to know how to train for, to apply for, and secure a job, or the entrepreneur in the private sector needs to reflect on what she needs to do from beginning to end to launch a successful business, the public problem solver and the public entrepreneur need to comprehend what UK politician Michael Barber calls the science of deliverology, what we might call in polite English, getting shit done. That means really having an overview of what's involved in solving public problems even before you dive into specific methods. Otherwise, it's too easy to get sidetracked, to go down the rabbit hole of human-centered design or data analysis, one tool, at the expense of really understanding the full skill set that's needed. As Benjamin Franklin, where did Benjamin Franklin go? Oh, I've lost him. As Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. It's therefore really important to start with a roadmap for getting from idea to implementation, even if you deviate from that path. Such a priori reflection opens up your thinking to different ways of working without getting too hung up on any one method. And this is especially important because most government training programs focus on one method for solving public problems to the exclusion of other tools and approaches. Therefore, it's not surprising that in a survey that we did of 400 government officials in Australia, a similar survey of 600 government officials in Paraguay, and another one of 400 plus government officials in the United States, that what we discovered was that on average, only a third of the public servants that we talked to actually knew and used innovative problem-solving skills. By contrast, what we saw is that in all of these places, once people knew and used a skill, they applied it much of the time in their work. So once they'd received training in innovation skills, they were using those skills over and over again. But the application of those skills is really scattershot, and the skills are too often not combined into a process for taking a project from idea to implementation. So if you're just to take one quick example of something I was talking about on the phone this morning with an agency official, if your goal is to improve access to free school lunches, talking to parents and students can offer their lived experience as a guide, but your project will not be legitimate, let alone effective, if you don't engage with those most affected, of course. But if you only talk to parents and students, it's not enough. If you fail to scrutinize the data about the student population's health needs or to consult with experts on nutrition and education, this reduces the likelihood of reaching a workable solution. So as a New Yorker, let me find my right slide here. I'm gonna apologize here. I'm gonna skip ahead because something happened with my slides and I might have to jump around here a little bit. But as a New Yorker, I like to think of the problem-solving pathway like a trip on the subway. Here's my little subway map of problem-solving skills. The journey has major stops. Those are the key junctures that are the primary stages of problem solving. Problem definition, solution identification, implementation, and evaluation. But like the major stops on the subway, here they're 14th Street and 34th Street and 42nd Street, for those who've been to New York in the past when we could travel, there are those lines that branch off at those places. And those branch lines represent the methods and tools we can employ at each stage of the process to leverage data. That is information gleaned from sensors, or collective intelligence. That is to say, information and insights gleaned from people, preferably people collaborating together. So let's talk about what those skills are briefly before we wrap up. First, there's the skill of problem definition. Public problem solvers know how to define a problem that's urgent, that matters to real people and that can be resolved. They know how to narrow a big issue into something concrete and specific that they can take action on. And that's not an obvious skill that people know. They have to know, though, how to define their problem actually using data analytical thinking methods in order to understand the breadth and nature of the problem that they're solving. But they also have to know how to deepen, as we've said, their understanding of the problem by actually talking to the people affected by it. That is to say, knowing how to use human-centered design. Therefore, they shun the closed-door practices of the past, and they design interventions in partnership with those whom they're trying to help. They also know how to use open innovation, or what we might call collective intelligence, to identify solutions to problems, adapting and adopting more participatory and democratic ways of working that are building on the collective intelligence of the communities that we're serving. Again, and to point out, again, the comment that I made before, they know how to use rapid evidence review, how to take advantage of new technology, not only to use open innovation and ask people for new solutions, but to scan for existing solutions, the best available ideas that have been tried elsewhere in the world, and to talk to the people who know what else has worked. This has to include both scanning academic studies and academic research, but also the much underutilized resource of evidence clearinghouses, as well as social innovation competitions that tell us what's working in the field. They know how to implement their projects by building teams and partnerships that cross many disciplines to become more effective at implementing change that others will adopt and accept. And finally, I would say the public entrepreneur knows how to use experimental techniques to evaluate what's worked and what has not, and either pivot from what's not working or stay on course as a result. They know how to expand work that has a beneficial and measurable impact on people's lives and to change what they're doing when it's not working. So to reiterate what I've now said more than once, at every stage of the process, public entrepreneurs need to be using data and collective intelligence to be able to know what works. Public problem solving, though, is especially difficult because there is no simple set of Triz-like tricks. There's no singular linear method or foolproof set of tools like Altshuler proposed for solving every problem. The professionals at Harvard's Building State Capability Program explain the concept of public problem solving by comparing getting from St. Louis to Los Angeles in the 19th and 21st centuries. Today, the trip is easy, but in the early 19th century, travelers lacked modern means of transport, they lacked roads, they lacked maps or knowledge of the terrain. The journey was fraught with perils and unknowns. I sort of like this analogy because it usefully captures what makes public problem solving different and much harder than mechanical problem solving. Moreover, in addition to being ill-structured and unpredictable, solving public problems can also be, as we all know, deeply political. There is no solution that will ever be acceptable to a significant portion of the people affected by the problem. But that doesn't mean that there are not many solutions which can be attempted with powerful results. But as I hope that I've made the case for today, there is a science, or at the very least an art, to tackling public problems. There are a set of approaches that make success more likely, and learning them is important because so many of us desire to make a difference in the world. If you consider that, as philosopher Peter Singer writes, I showed you his picture a minute ago, sorry, out of order. For the first 100 years of the animal rights movement, organizers were highly successful at fundraising and building membership, yet they won virtually no tangible policy victories for animal rights around the world. We're too impatient today, and the challenges that we're facing are frankly too important and too existential to wait 100 years. We have to make a tangible dent in the universe much sooner than that. We need, I would argue, to develop this repertoire, this common toolkit of creative problem-solving approaches that borrow from a variety of disciplines, such as design and engineering, and we need to apply new technology, data, and innovation to yield creative solutions to our problems. Of course, complex or wicked societal problems can never truly be solved. As Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber wrote in their 1973 article, social problems, at best are never truly solved. They're only resolved over and over again. No matter how successful an intervention, there is always more to do. And even if a need is not satisfied, it doesn't stay that way for long. A problem once solved, not unlike, I think about it, like the dishes in my sink during COVID, rarely stays solved in the real world. We have to keep working at it. But the fact that the work of public problem solving never seems to go away is really not a reason to give up. There's a famous saying from the Ethics of the Fathers. That's the compilation of sayings from those rabbis that lived around the time of Jesus. They said, it's not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either. Around the world, it's a time of anxiety, a sense that we're all challenged, a sense that we are suffering from a kind of institutional dereliction. We can't expect to tackle tomorrow's problems with yesterday's toolkit. And if in the 21st century, we have to equip ourselves with the skills of solving public problems. The task of doing so falls to us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth, for your talk. One thing that perhaps is not very clear in your bio when we started is that you are a pioneer and you are an inspiration for a number of public entrepreneurs, including in Brazil. Beth was appointed as the first Chief Innovation Officer by Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey, and she was also a pioneer at the White House, where she served as the first Deputy Chief Technology Officer and Director of the Open Government, the White House Open Government Initiative. It's such an inspiration to hear you, Beth. The first question is, well, the Innovation Week, the event, Innovation Week 2020, is also the Latin American hub for the Government Aftershock, a global initiative from the OECD Observatory on Public Sector Innovation. And there are 3 government aftershock underlying questions that are throughout our program, steering our program, and they are, what do we want to leave behind after the shock? What do we want to keep? And what should we do definitely?
So I think that we've all learned a lot of valuable lessons from COVID, unfortunately learning them the hard way. And I think that as I've hopefully pointed out in many ways, that this ability to act in an entrepreneurial fashion, the ability in particular to use data and collaboration probably being the harder lesson for us to learn, working across boundaries, across government agencies, across public and private, across academic and government, has really been essential to helping us respond to these challenges. And I just really hope that the lesson that we take away from this is that the way to create more innovative and effective institutions is by changing how we work. Now, I don't want to minimize the challenges. There are plenty of public servants watching who are going to say, but what about procurement? And what about the time it takes to hire people? And what about the difficulties of these rules and that rules? Agreed. But the way that we begin to make a difference, the way that we begin to move the big ship of state is by moving the small rudder of skills and human practices by investing in public sector talent. We're talking all the time now in the news about the future of work and the need to retrain people with new skills for better private sector jobs. We need to be thinking about training people in digital skills and innovation skills and what I would more broadly call problem-solving skills in government so that we can begin to be more effective in how we do things. That's going to come primarily, again, from using data, using collaboration. And it's important to recognize that, frankly, those are not skills we're born with, but that we have to learn.
Fantastic, and it's so good to hear that being in a school of government. Another question: what kind of software and/or hardware do we need to make the democracy of the future work?
Oh, that's a great question. We don't have enough time today for all these good questions. I think, and it depends on how you understand software, because I would say that I'm going to use software again in the metaphorical sense. that we need these skills coupled with the technologies, the literal sense of software and hardware. I would point out two things that are particularly important. One is obviously the new skills of machine learning that allow us to make sense of a great deal of information, even without knowing what we're looking for, allows us to process large quantities of information and obviously spot problems before they arise. It also allows us to take on this new kind of public input and public participation in a way that's manageable. Without using machine learning, it becomes very difficult for us to actually process large quantities of information and content, and makes it inefficient for us to take advantage of the collective intelligence at our disposal. So more broadly, though, I would say in addition to machine learning and as a subset of artificial intelligence, we really also need to take advantage of the technologies of collective intelligence. In other words, those communications and decision-making tools that allow us to work together with a large number of people across a distance, hearing their opinions, getting their input, getting their rapid advice so that we can figure out what works and put it to work quickly.
Fantastic. I will encourage the people who's watching us to send us questions using the QR code that probably is on your screen right now. And I have another question here. 80 years ago, you delivered a fantastic TED Talk where you said that governments exist to channel the flow of two things, values and expertise, to and from government and to and from citizens, to the end of making decisions. But somehow, the way that our institutions were designed made this model anemic. Looking back to 2012 till now, what is the score for how we are doing, how democracies are doing in terms of improving the design of our institutions to better deliver value, and what are your main observations and pinpoints on this road?
You're aging me when you tell me it's 8 years ago, and you know we all have to recognize that these are lifelong agendas, that we have a lot of work to do. I think very briefly, on innovation more broadly and delivering more effectively, we've seen huge amounts of innovation over the last decade, scores of examples coming out, especially of cities all around the world, of doing really innovative projects that take advantage of data, of human-centered design, of collective intelligence, to really govern more effectively and more legitimately, as well as more efficiently. So if we had more time, we would list loads of examples that really are about using these new skills to do things differently. I think when it comes to the issue of how we think about expertise in government, unfortunately, at least at a national level, this is where in many respects we've gone backwards. So we're seeing, for example, at the GovLab, we are using global collective intelligence to provide better expertise to 7 governments in Latin America, including several places in Brazil, to help with response to coronavirus. But at the national level, what we're seeing, of course, under the politics of the last presidential administration is a total disregard for expertise, a willingness to fire government experts. We had a recent federal action by the now outgoing president just 3 weeks ago to say he can convert any public servant into an at-will employee whom he can fire on January 19th on his way out the door. It's a very significant and little noticed policy action amidst all of the discussion about our election. But it's just one in a long series of efforts to really undermine the use of expertise in national governance. So we have, in short, a long way to go when we think about truth and facts and misinformation and how we use it. But I'm glad to report that there is, as much as things are going wrong at the national level here, they're going very right at the state and local level in terms of a lot of innovation that we're seeing. Here in the States and around the world, lots of examples to give, and I'll be happy to share some examples in the chat and on Twitter and elsewhere.
Fantastic. One last question, which is a great question to pick your brain on this. We have so many issues to tackle. What should be the priority to the social entrepreneur and public entrepreneur to do first when solving a problem?
What should be the first priority? Your mic cut out there just at the end. What should be the first priority in terms of solving a problem?
Yeah. And also in terms of the issues that the so many issues that we have out there to tackle.
So I'll just mention, yes, well, I think importantly is to pick the issue that one is, when it comes to which topic, the issue that one's passionate about and that you have the ability to do something about is extraordinarily important, but passion goes a very long way. But in terms of the skills, I would say there are two. One is the ability to define a problem. And that sounds so simple, and yet it's incredibly difficult because people tend to bite off things that are bigger than they can chew. That they don't have jurisdiction over, that they don't have the ability to move forward, that they don't have the institutional resources to get done, and that frankly reflects what their priorities might be, but do not reflect the problem as people experience them on the ground. So I'll give you a quick example. Right now, I'm working on a project, a citizen engagement project, to use new technology to engage students, parents, and teachers in education policy making here, because the way that we do education policy making generally excludes those people most affected, namely kids and students. So I think the ability to understand how they define the problem, how they see the issues, rather than how we as policymakers might view them, is extraordinarily important. And the second I'll mention, simply because, Bruna, you pointed me on to a wonderful book on the topic of building partnerships that I'm really grateful to you for, is really this ability to know how to forge partnerships, how to collaborate with people across sectors, and to do so in a way that puts the public interest and public values first, so that we can take advantage of the talent and data and technology and skills that come from other sectors, while still using our role in government to put the public values and public mission first in how we do things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you all who's watching us. I will have to wrap it up here. There's so many great questions. And again, it was so inspirational for us to have you as our first keynote speaker in this wonderful week coming up. Obrigada a todos.
I wish you a wonderful week. Wonderful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Obrigada a todos. Eu volto a palavra para os nossos mestres de cerimônia. Obrigada.